Hello and welcome to Catholic Parents Online, a YouTube and podcast channel where we share tips and resources on Catholic parenting. This is brought to you by the Theology of the Body parenting team of the Apostolate for Catholic Truth. Presented with the lens of the theology of the body, we will see how we can be sincere gifts of ourselves to our kids in ways that will help them find true happiness and flourish in accordance with God's wonderful plan for each and every one of them. My name is John Hui, and I'm your host for this podcast. The church is often accused of being anti-science and that faith is not compatible with science. And one of the commonest examples given to assert this point is that of Galileo Galilei. It has been said that the church gave him a hard time because his proposal that the earth rotates around the sun was against biblical teaching. Was that the case? Was the church, or is the church, against science? Or was there something more to the saga? To shed more light on this topic, we have Mr. Nick Chui. Nick is an educator by profession. In addition, he holds a master's in theology from the Pontifical John Paul II Institute for Marriage and Family in Melbourne. Welcome to Catholic Parents Online, Nick.
Thank you, John, for having me, and I'm grateful to be here. I guess you can say that I'm also right now a Catholic parent. I have a 3-month-old daughter.
Yes, would like to share with us because I think there was a very happy event that took place not too long ago.
Yes, so I'm grateful for having my 3-month-old daughter, and I hope to also be a good Catholic father to her.
Congratulations.
And this topic is also close to my heart because yes, I'm a Catholic educator, but I'm a Catholic history educator. And this is, of course, a historical episode, and it's something which is worth talking about.
Yes, which is why you got you into this top podcast for this topic.
Right? Thank you.
Very good. So we're very happy that you have joined the ranks of Catholic parents, Nick. Yeah, and so congrats again to you and your wife.
May God be praised.
Yes, forever. So let's begin with a little bit of who Galileo Galilei was, Nick. Would you like to shed some light on that? That seems to be the commonly held assumption, isn't it? That many people have, that the church was anti-science.
Yes, that's actually quite... I'm a troll usually. So when people mention Galileo is an example of the church being anti-science, that the church persecuted all the scientists. So I would say, name 2 scientists. Usually cannot... okay. Yeah, at most they may say, Giordano Bruno. Those who know, they will say Giordano Bruno was not a scientist. But in any case, the whole point is this. When usually my response, name 2. Usually cannot name 1. Because you realize, if I cannot name, what does that mean? So in history, we have a very important policy. A swallow does not make a summer. So to say, one swallow does not a summer make. In other words, you may have one example of apparently a scientist being persecuted for his scientific views by, in this case, the Catholic Church. Okay, just take for the sake of argument that is the case. There is a secondary question to ask. Is this typical or atypical of the Church's attitude towards scientists in general? Because you cannot simply run with one piece of evidence and make a generalization. You need to first ask yourself whether this is a typical or anomalous situation. So yeah, that's to me a basic rules of historical evidence.
Right. So what was it that he proposed that was quite controversial at that time and appeared to get him into trouble?
In terms of his scientific achievements, he was not the first to propose. Actually, Copernicus, I mentioned earlier, was the first to propose around that time, it will be in Florence, that the Earth, along with the other planets, revolved around the sun. This is known as the heliocentric theory of the universe. So the Earth revolves around the sun. And this challenged the pre-existing scientific paradigm all the way to Ptolemy and Aristotle, especially Ptolemy. That would be AD 65 or so, first century, that no, the sun, the Earth is in the center of the universe and the planets and the sun revolves around it. So his controversy, so to say, started because he proposed an alternative theory of the solar system. If it's just simply about a scientific theory, you probably will wonder what the fuss is all about. So that's a fair question. But then, as scientists are wont to do, he was a pioneering scientist. He attempted to challenge the pre-existing scientific paradigm. His other scientists got upset and irritated with him. It went a lot of back and forth, probably quite nasty, as intelligent people who have an ego want to do. And some of them start accusing, I think you are contradicting scripture. That would be pressing the nuclear button. This was Florence, Italy after the Reformation. Everybody was Catholic. So everybody will consider themselves, I'm a good Catholic. Sorry, I practice nepotism. I'm a good Catholic. I sleep around with people. Why? I'm a good Catholic. So everybody will say they are a good Catholic. I don't want to contradict scripture and so on. So when you argue with your friend, you just argue as per normal, you're wrong, etc. But when you press the nuclear button, it's like, you are wrong not because you are wrong because you are contradicting scripture. And that is the nuclear button. So his scientific colleagues, so to say, press the nuclear button and says, you're wrong because you contradict scripture. And they actually, instead of engaging in scientific arguments, they actually cited scripture to him. So for example, I give you one example of the scripture they would cite to him. They will say, for example, that Ecclesiastes 1 chapter 5, chapter 1 verse 5. The sun rises and the sun sets, and hastening to its place, it rises there again. Or Psalm 104 verse 5. The Lord set the earth on its foundations, it can never be moved. So in other words, they press the nuclear button. What you are saying is contrary to scripture. So therefore, you are on dangerous ground, you better back off. And Galileo says, I'm a good Catholic. I don't want to contradict scripture, but I think your interpretation of scripture is wrong. Oh, now you want to talk about scripture, right? Then we need to decide who can adjudicate this response. Let's call in the Inquisition. And then things, one thing will lead to another. Because once you talk about scripture, the church is involved, and the church calls in the Inquisition.
So am I right to say that he actually initially got into trouble with his fellow scientists who held on to the prevailing view at that time that the sun revolved around the earth rather than the other way around, which we accept today?
Yes,
and
correct.
Because of that, they actually tried various ways and means to contradict him, and when they could not quite do so, they invoked the church to try to get him into trouble.
Yes, you can say that. Galileo also, unfortunately, at that point in time, he is right as we see it today. But he was not, at that point in time, the proof he attempted to provide is actually not a very sound proof. We know it today. So he says, how do I know that the earth revolves around the sun? Look at the tides, T-I-D-E-S. There's high tide and there's low tide. There's high tide and there's low tide. Why did that happen? Because the earth is moving. That's why we have high tide and low tide. The scientist at the time says, don't joke with me. We have high tide and low tide is because of the moon's gravitational pull. They know that, Today we say that those scientists were correct, It's the moon's gravitational pull. So the proof which Galileo attempted to use is actually an unsuccessful proof. So many of the scientists at the time were quite frustrated with Galileo. Why are you making such a claim when one of your proofs is actually not very sound? So that was actually, unfortunately, Galileo's point of view. And then now he steps into the purview of scripture as well. And hence, of course, things become heated up.
I see. So as this developed and he was, in a sense, referred to the church authorities, he subsequently got into trouble with the church authorities as well. And he had a very interesting relationship with the Pope and Cardinal Bellarmine. Would you like to explain to us what actually happened in his relationship with the Pope and the subsequent trouble that he went into?
Sure. Actually, he got into his first encounter with church authorities is actually with Cardinal Robert Bellarmine. That was in 1616. And Cardinal Robert Bellarmine told him, you can hold your theory as a hypothesis, but please do not teach it as true, because your proof is not so solid. So that's one. And second, why should I reinterpret scripture with your, at this point in time, rather unsound scientific hypothesis? In the absence of further evidence, I should not be reinterpreting scripture. And the current scientific consensus, the geocentrism, where the earth is in the middle and everything revolves around it, should be allowed to stand. But Galileo, you can hold it as a hypothesis. So Galileo reluctantly accepts this, but he says, no, it's not a hypothesis, it's truth. Robert Bellarmine tells him, then like that, I can't help you already. Then you don't say anything. So Galileo says, okay, if I cannot teach it as truth, I don't want to teach it as hypothesis, I will just keep quiet. So in 1616, he agrees to just keep quiet. And that's about it. So that's with Cardinal Robert Bellarmine. And subsequently, Cardinal Robert Bellarmine will pass away, and the Pope will change. In 1623, Cardinal Barberini becomes Pope Urban VIII, and Galileo gets excited. Cardinal Barberini is my good friend. I always have, makan, all this with him. And at that point in time, when Bellarmine asked me to keep quiet, Cardinal Barberini was saying, I know privately that I don't really agree with it. It's okay to talk, man. It's okay to talk. So Galileo thought, okay, now the guy, my good friend, now becomes Pope. Surely he will let me publish whatever I want to publish. So that is the situation. And actually, it's quite interesting. So he will have his dinners with the Pope. He's a very prominent Catholic. They respect him for his scientific work, because he invented you must remember, he invented the telescope. So and then he actually proved that the Earth's surface is not smooth. It is actually have craters. People didn't believe that. He said, don't believe, look at my telescope and see. So he's a very famous guy. So he meets the Pope, and then they will discuss about, among other topics they talk about was about whether heliocentrism is right or geocentrism is right. The Pope didn't agree with him. The Pope says, no, I don't think, Galileo, you are correct. But I'm an open-minded guy, so we can talk, discuss over dinner, and then it's okay. We agree to disagree. So that's the situation. So Galileo says, you're my good friend, you're an open-minded person. Can I discuss these two books together, these two worldviews together? So the Pope says, yeah, you can discuss both worldviews. You just want to summarize their arguments, right? He said, yeah, I just like to summarize, so because you don't mind people talking about it, right? He said, no, I don't mind people talking about it. The Pope will say, as long as you don't argue it as a fact, you can summarize what people are saying, no problem. So Galileo does that. He wrote his book, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, in 1632. So it's supposed to be a dialogue between two people. And unfortunately, the geocentric point of view, the old scientific hypothesis which Galileo tries to refute, the person who shares this, his name is Simplico. As you can imagine the name, simple-minded. And then all the arguments Simplico uses, the Pope reads the book and he says, my gosh, didn't I use them when I'm talking to you during dinner? Now you write in the book. Are you trying to say I'm stupid? And now the Pope gets upset. That is one of those things. And then, of course, the Pope says, I'm an open-minded person. But when he sees this, Galileo didn't mention him. But then the arguments, the Pope reads, hey, how he know all this? This sounds like what I said to him in dinner time. He's trying to insult me, is it? The Pope gets upset. That is the situation in about 1632, around there. And
so is that why he was referred to the Inquisition?
Yes, unfortunately. So the Pope says that, I told you you can summarize both views. I told you you shouldn't advocate for one. But then now you call the other view, the person called Simplico, and you use some of my arguments and you make it sound so stupid. You are not simply summarizing both views, you are advocating for it. So yeah, he calls in the Inquisition. So the Inquisition says, oh my gosh, no choice, we have to go and sort him out. So yeah, so the Inquisition comes in and they tell Galileo, what are you up to? Galileo says, no, I did not advocate anything. What? The Inquisition reads the text and says, I find that hard to believe. In 1616, you agree to Cardinal Robert Bellarmine not to advocate as truth, but hold as hypothesis you don't want. And now this book, it really sounds like you are advocating one point of view. So in the end, the Inquisition says, okay. Galileo says, no, I never. The Inquisition, you better tell me the truth. The Inquisition did say, if not, we have our usual ways of interrogation. That may include torture. Galileo says, yeah, sure. I will tell you the truth. I will cooperate. The Inquisition eventually tells Galileo, his charge is very quite interesting. You are vehemently suspected of heresy. They're very precise, They never say you are a heretic because can't prove it. And you can say, like you write one particular point of view in such a foolish way and the other one in such a brilliant way. People vehemently suspect that you believe one view and not the other, right? But if you were to tell the person, no, I just happen to write it in this way, you can't actually prove it. So, and the Inquisition so said, okay, we will charge you for vehement suspicion of heresy. You can't say that you are a heretic because can't prove your intention. But from the way you're writing, we are bloody suspicious. So that is actually how the Inquisition charged him for. So 7 out of 10 of the cardinals voted to charge Galileo. And his punishment was house arrest in his beautiful Florence villa and to recite the penitential psalms once a week. So poor guy, house arrest in his Florence villa, was allowed to publish his scientific works, etc., but house arrest, that was his punishment. And
since you brought up this topic of the Inquisition,
yes,
many people would have very interesting, possibly unreal impressions of the Inquisition. Sure. And since you brought it up, it might be a good time at this point in time to ask you, what was the Inquisition about? There are many people who think that there was the church's way of suppressing dissenters, and like you mentioned just now, things using even methods like torture and all that to get information is not something we would approve of, and certainly something the church wouldn't approve of today, but apparently it was practiced at that time. So you share with us a little bit more of this. Sure.
If you, of course, watch Monty Python sketches, he said, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. So that's the tagline, and then, of course, very unpleasant. But actually, the Inquisition started off with a good intention. Every society, even today, would be concerned with what we call toxic or dangerous / extremist ideologies. Our government will take action, and they will have people going in to try to rehabilitate those who have fallen prey to such ideas. So even today, certain ideas are beyond the pale, action needs to be taken. So in the case of Europe during the 17th century, what was beyond the pale, today we'll say, no, that's quite normal, but what was beyond the pale at the time for Catholic Europe was heresy. Heresy was not a private matter. It was practically equivalent by the secular authorities to treason. So in other words, the mindset was, if you are a good Italian, you are a good Catholic. If you can't be a good Catholic, then I suspect your loyalty to my country and so on. So that's a problem. So the heresy has what you call that, a subversive dimension, which at least at that point in time, the secular authorities believe there is a need to suppress heresy. So what does the church do? We need to be clear on who is a heretic, who is not. You, secular authorities, are not competent to judge these things. You are not trained as a lawyer. You cannot go through procedures like trial by fire and so on. These are not proper legal procedures. We will send our inquisitors, who are all trained in civil law and canon law and the basic rules of evidence, to determine what is going on. So the inquisitors came from that point of view. We want to ensure that people have a fair trial have justice, so that they don't just simply someone accuse me of heresy and that's it. My reputation ruined. Inquisitor will come and say, no, we'll look at the evidence and then we'll sort things out. So that's the Inquisition. And there were very, very interesting stories, actually. Some people considered the secular courts as so harsh, they said, can you please accuse me of heresy so that I can be tried by the Inquisition instead? Very interesting. So that because the inquisitors tend to be a bit more lenient in their punishments. So, but not to downplay the thing. So the inquisitor will say heresy is very serious. It's usually a capital offense. So if you persist in it, if you recant your heresy, or if it's just minor thing or whatever, you don't really know what you're talking about, or this, we'll send you on a pilgrimage, give you psalms to recite, etc., and move on your life. But it's very serious. It's a potentially capital offense. The church convicts people of heresy or not, the state will take over from there. So the church doesn't sentence people to death. The church courts, the Inquisition doesn't sentence people to death. The Inquisition will only say whether a person is guilty of heresy or not. So that's the Inquisition. With regards to torture, unfortunately, at that point in time, 17th century Europe, what we today will consider as torture, they probably will consider as enhanced interrogation techniques. Yeah. So things like, for example, clapping the hands for 15 minutes, so you experience some physical pain. So the Inquisition had very specific rules. Only can do for 15 minutes, no more than that. They must give people a drink of water and so on. I'm not saying these things are correct, but I'm just saying that these things were inherited from the time of the Romans. So to say, it just simply carried on. The sensitivity to human dignity could be better, but it was something which is simply carried over from Roman times.
Right. So it appears as though the Inquisition was actually started with a good intention to protect the integrity of teachings and to make sure that heresies would not be allowed to be disseminated to the population.
Yes, and also that innocent people are not accused of heresy and then simply thrown into whatever. So when Inquisition, for example, one of the things, the Spanish Inquisition, for example, gets a very bad reputation.
Oh yes, it does.
But actually, yes, correct. But actually, if you look at the historical record, wherever the Spanish Inquisition went, people convicted of witchcraft, for example, at the time there was witch mania, dropped very severely, because the rules of evidence for the Spanish Inquisition were so high that most people were not convicted of witchcraft. So they know this is not a witch, it's not a witch, how can you anyhow accuse people of witch? So whenever the Spanish Inquisition goes, the number of witchcraft convictions actually dropped quite severely.
Right. So, but I think that there is some concern, or you might say some impressions that the individuals might have that the Inquisition brought about some rather nasty consequences for those who are held guilty, and especially with this thing about burning at the stake, right?
Yes.
So I think it's good to clarify this and allow listeners to have a clearer picture of what actually happened.
Burning at the stake was one of those punishments which the secular authorities consider as the part of the repertoire of inflicting the death penalty. The idea, at least in Renaissance psychology, is that we reserve burning at stake for heretics because we are concerned for their souls. When the fire is lit up, you know that that's where you might end up, if you persist in heresy, in hell, So when the fire is lit up, etc., the priest will stand by somewhere nearby. If you start panicking and you shout out your confession, the priest can still absolve you. And then, okay, your body is burnt, but then your soul is now safe. So in the mind, at least in the Renaissance mind, the soul is more important than the body. We want you to go to heaven, or at least spend time in purgatory, not in hell. So burning you at the stake is in some sense an act of mercy, because it may frighten you. I mean, rightly or wrongly, I'm not saying they are right. I'm just saying the mindset. It may frighten you into recanting your heresy because you realize, this might be my eternal fate. So you shout out your confession. Of course, to what extent is by panic or this kind of thing, they should know, like, they shouldn't do that. So, you shout out your confession, the priest can absolve you, and then you can still make it to heaven. So burning at the stake, you must be understood in the historical context. Today we say that, in secular culture, we say that that's just cruelty. We probably will say that, but then.
So there was a practice of that time, which certainly many of us will not agree with today, but it was, in a sense, something that was inherited down the centuries to the culture of that time.
Yes, and I think that's important to note. As a history teacher, I always will say that you need to judge people by the standards of that time. So after all, they probably will judge you right now based on our own standards, and we may well be lacking in some areas as well. So I think that's important to know.
Right. Well, thank you very much for clarifying these little intricacies about the Inquisition.
No worries.
So it appears that for Galileo, he got into trouble more because of personal issues with fellow scientists, and ultimately the Pope that got him into trouble rather than outright opposition from the church for his views.
Yes, you can say that the church made a mistake by interfering with scientific hypotheses. So that's John Paul II apologized for two things. He apologized for treating Galileo as such because, the Pope should not do that. Let's put it that way. Even if your pride is hurt, you should not be calling in the Inquisition to sort someone out. That's not a good thing. So he apologized for that. And he also apologized for the church interfering in a scientific debate, which should be allowed to play out accordingly. Don't intervene too quickly on either side. Just let the evidence play out. So it's like, even though you may say Galileo's evidence not so good, so we intervene should be correct. No, just let it play out, and then from there things, the truth should emerge from there.
That's right. So the Pope will stick to teaching faith and morals and protecting and proclaiming it for the church.
Yes,
and science will leave it to the scientists. Yeah,
we leave it to the scientists to sort out based on the internal rules of evidence and so on, and we see what happens after that. Right. So I think that would be perhaps a more helpful thing to do.
Certainly. At this point in time, then, do you think that this commonly held view that science contradicts faith holds water? Can it be supported? Because there's
science
a commonly held view
yes.
that science contradicts faith, or faith contradicts
correct.
Science, right? So what would you like to talk about regards to that?
I guess we need to first clarify these two terms. What do we mean by faith and what do we mean by science? And this is indeed a pretty much widespread conception. Like for me as an educator, I teach history. So I teach the rules of historical evidence, the rules of historical reasoning. I don't teach science, but I teach history and I teach reasoning. So a number of my non-Christian students are quite intrigued. They will say, Mr. Chui, you are clearly a man of faith, but yet you teach in a logically rigorous manner. What's up? My answer to them is as follows. Faith is not believing without evidence. So that's very important to know. Faith, ultimately, if you want to ask me one word, what is faith? Faith is trust. So that's one. Second, I do not use the scientific method, but I am reasoning. So in other words, science is one way of reasoning, but it is not the only way. So for example, the scientific method calls for experiment. So you can do A, you say that A is the hypothesis, you prove it by experiment, and the experiment can be repeated again. That is the scientific method in a nutshell. The historical method, the historical way of reasoning is not scientific, but it is still reasonable. Something has already happened. The atomic bomb can only be dropped once on Hiroshima. You can't repeat that again, so to say, right? It's a different event.
So if you want to repeat that again.
We must not repeat that, and correct, no, it would be absurd, right? So we say that, okay, did the Soviet, did Japan surrender because of the atomic bomb? you can assess the evidence, but you can't repeat it again. So your way of reasoning is more like a lawyer, like to assess evidence, look at the credibility of eyewitnesses, and so on. So already we see that the category of reason is bigger than the word science. Science is one way to reason, but it is not the only way to reason. So that's the first thing I like to tell people. The second thing is as follows. When I say faith, I mean trust. And when you ask people, what comes first? In everyday human relationships, does faith come first or reason comes first? If you were to take a mother-child relationship, or with my own daughter, what comes first? She has to trust us. Subsequently, when she grows older, I tell her, don't touch the boiling hot stove. She has no science. In her reasoning is that, okay, daddy loves me, I will listen to him. It is pre-scientific, but it is not irrational. Only later when she goes to school, she will learn about heat. She'll learn about everything else, and then from there, science, you will learn the scientific method. So even in ordinary human relationships, which comes first? Trust or what do you call that? Or reason. Trust comes first before reason. So this misconception very often happens. Sometimes fellow believers have to own it. Reason is not faith's enemy. It's very important to witness to reason as a Christian. And then from there, over time, misconceptions can be dispelled. Though unfortunately, this misconception is very often widespread, and sometimes Christians fumble in their attempt to explain why this misconception is not the case. And actually, the best way, in my experience, to dispel this misconception is the Christian's personal witness to being a rigorously reasonable person.
Right. So faith and science are definitely not incompatible. They are just two different ways of pursuing the truth, and the absolute truth himself is God, isn't it?
Yes.
So there are two different methods and two different ways of really finding God in the sense. And I think that as a medical professional, I can say that I can share that with the years of learning more, as I learn more about the human body, as I learn more about how the human body works and the wonders of nature, I can tell you, the more I learn about this, the more I marvel at how God works in his creation.
Yes. So your example is a brilliant one, because when you look at the human body, you will see integrated complexity. Yes. So science shows you integrated complexity. Science is silent on the reason for such an integrated complexity. To ask for the reason behind such integrated complexity is, by definition, not a scientific question, but a philosophical one. So as long as science recognizes its limits, I am operating scientifically, I can describe reality to you, but to ask a question, what is behind reality, if at all anything? Is it chance or design, etc.? That would be a philosophical question. So classifying questions accurately goes a long way in clarifying misconceptions.
Certainly. Thank you very much, Nick. Are there any other points you'd like to share with us before we end this podcast in relation to faith and science, and maybe even on the Galileo affair?
Well, actually, I would like to say that this witness to reason is actually one of the reasons, pardon my pun, why Christianity rose in the Western world. Because actually, this is from Cardinal Ratzinger when he was Cardinal, Pope Benedict XVI when he was a cardinal, and he makes the constant point that when Christianity showed up in the world stage, it did not side with the religions of the day. It sided with the philosophers. And the philosophers were the one who insisted on reason. Christianity says that, of course, this is the Logos, but the Logos now has a human face, Jesus Christ. And we don't only insist on reason, we also insist on upright ethical behavior. So it is this package deal, insistence on reason and insistence on loving your neighbor, which made Christianity credible in the Western world at that time and became a dominant force. So today, we should not separate the two things. All that matters is your good behavior, and then your brain just drop it off. If Ratzinger is correct, and I believe he is, both are necessary. So for me as a teacher, I'm very conscious that I must witness to witness as a reasonable teacher, as in teach my subject. In this case, I teach history in a rigorously historical manner. So that is one thing I will do, but also witness in terms of how I treat my students with their dignity and so on. So it's these twin pillars which will make Christianity credible. Unfortunately, in the case of Galileo, one of the pillars was missing. It's called charity. And because charity was missing, the Pope of the day thought that he knew everything, and then he did what he did. So that was not good. And then there was certainly not a pleasant experience. And when people read it as a case study, while it is not correct, it is not correct as a piece of historical evidence that the church is against science. That's not correct. But it is not morally correct for the Pope to do what he did to Galileo.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, over time, as we see so many things and read about so many other things, it always amazes me how, despite the human weaknesses of us Christians, right, from all the way down to us and all the way up to the popes from past, despite our human failings and weaknesses, the church has continued to proclaim faith and morals in a consistent, clear, concise, and correct manner. It is such an amazing situation for me that I cannot but really marvel at how God protects his church despite all our human weaknesses.
Faith, morals, and also reason. I'd like to maybe recommend to your readers the following book. How the Catholic Church Built Western Civilization by historian Thomas E. Woods. So instead of usually you thought, okay, faith and morals, that's one thing, certainly. But this book actually argues that the church, Western civilization owes the church everything. The university, science, architecture, international law, economics, morality, everything. So whatever you make of all his claims, it is also important to know, you can say, the power of this belief in faith, morals, and also this dedication to reason. So just like to maybe for your readers, right, do consider reading this book. I certainly read it myself. And yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. It's been wonderful
You're most welcome
to you and getting so well enlightened on these various issues, including Galileo, Inquisition, and so on, and the relationship between faith and science and reason. We thank you very much for your insights, and we look forward to seeing you again. And to all of our listeners out there, thank you very much for joining us. Till we meet again, take care, and God bless you and the family always. Goodbye.